Well, we are live today with Legal Views with Attorney Sheila R. Stewart. I am your host of Legal Views. We are located in the beautiful city of Clayton, Missouri, 231 South Bemiston Avenue, Suite 800. Please feel free to contact me for your legal needs and concerns. We are broadcasting live with C-Joy Network, and we want to give a shout out and an appreciation to Daryl Breath and from Boston, Massachusetts, and as well as Minister Donnie Savage. You guys are doing an outstanding job in the work that you are doing, bringing interesting topics to our listeners every week. And we have our esteemed guest with us tonight, Attorney Kenneth Goins. Attorney Kenneth Goins has been practicing law for over 30 years. He has practiced in areas of administrative law, criminal law, family law, as well as doing lots of different works with the municipalities. He has done a tremendous job here in the St. Louis metropolitan area in representing many individuals as well as corporations. Mr. Goins, Attorney Kenneth Goins, is also the president of the Mound City Bar Association. However, these opinions that he will bring today solely and completely represent the views of Attorney Kenneth Goins. As you know, these are views. Nothing on this show is you are entitled to your opinion, in other words, on this show. So these are views that we welcome people to share and to discuss. And as you know, we have come upon the 7th anniversary of Mike Brown. And Mike Brown was killed over seven years ago by Darren Wilson, the police officer from Ferguson. So we're going to look at the progress, if any, that was made over the last 7 years. We're going to look at Ferguson then and now. We're also going to talk about the recent resignation of Governor Cuomo out of New York. And we're going to let you know, we're going to give you some solutions on how you can use your bar association to get advice and to get assistance with your business, with your church, or how you can just become involved with your local bar association. Hello there, Attorney Goins. How are you doing today? And welcome to Legal Views.
Hey, Sheila. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to give my personal opinions. I appreciate the glowing rendition of my prior legal practice. I appreciate that. I've been in private practice and also represented governments for the last 30 years. And, I felt like I got a little bit of experience and also lived in the community, in St. Louis community my entire life. So I think I have an opinion that's vested in the fact that I live here. So,
well, that's great. That's great. We're going to talk about, we have time. I want to get your opinion on some of the current conditions of St. Louis metropolitan area, but we're going to start off with more of a global conversation that rivets throughout the United States of America and how people are viewing different issues as it relates nationally. Okay, nationally. So let's look at the Mike Brown death. Mike Brown was an 18-year-old graduate. His mother did a tremendous job. She said one of the hardest things she did was working to get her son out of high school. She did a tremendous job. He was able to graduate from high school. And then this incident happens in Ferguson where he is shot down by the police. And everyone knows that there was conflicting stories on what took place that day, that somber day in Ferguson, Missouri, when young Michael Brown was gunned down by Darren Wilson, the police officer. Just to get the conversation started, what did his death represent to you? I can just, for me, it represent a change or an awakening how we view the criminalization of Black skin and work against the police department or the police department. I mean, just to, to get the foundation started. I don't think all police officers are bad. I have a lot of officers in my family. However, there has been a problem of reconciliation between communities of color and police officers. So what does this death, what does this death mean to you, Attorney Goins?
When I think of Mike Brown, first I think of a tragedy. I think of a young African American male who was shot, at 18 years old, with the rest of his life ahead of him. So, the idea that he was shot and, he was unarmed and had his entire life ahead of him, and he should have gone home that day, to me, is one of the biggest takes for me is that this shouldn't have happened. Now, in terms of what he represents, I think he represents, well, let me go back. So when I heard about Michael Brown, about the shooting, I heard about it on through social media on my phone. And, what I heard is that, a police officer had shot an African-American male with his hands up, and, of course, the whole hands up, don't shoot, that's the mantra that, that permeated around the world. And, I had no problem believing that happened, and that's the situation. I had no problem believing that a police officer had shot an African-American male who was unarmed with his hands up. The fact that, as an attorney who had represented, police officers, actually had a contract, representing police officers for a while there. The fact that I believe that was an indication of the problem that the system had, in my opinion. And then when I looked at the response that, the city of Ferguson and in particular the police chief had, it was insufficient. I think what I saw, based on what I remember, I saw, the white police chief, come with another white police chief and pretty much say, this guy's going to do the investigation. I think when you have those kinds of dynamics, what the community is looking for is an objective investigation, a quick, objective, fair investigation, and an investigation that is headed by people who know what they're doing, who have a history, but also diverse. What you don't want is, oftentimes the police investigating themselves, or an all white commission, or even an all black commission, or an all conservative or all Democratic commission doing the investigation. You need people in the room who won't collude, who disagree, who have different points of view. And what struck me in the Mike Brown situation is that I did not see that happen. I saw a system that I thought was trying to protect itself and not conduct an independent, objective investigation. And then that's the failing in the system. And now what it represents, since Mike Brown, there have been, I think, substantial and concrete changes in how we address these things. And I think you see it in the political makeup in Ferguson. I think you see it in how the courts deal with traffic and violations. I think a lot of what was going on then too was, the African American community's frustration with the way that the criminal justice system was treating us, at that time. And I think a lot of that manifests itself in our reaction to the Brown shooting.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my initial answer.
That's a very good answer. It's a very good answer. And there was a lot of frustration in that community. And when I say the criminalization of black skin or brown skin, that individual, they do not have the opportunity to explain, or they're not given the opportunity to make mistakes or to err in any way. The behavior primarily is we're going to shoot first and ask questions later because we're fearful.
Yeah, and I guess what you're alluding to is the question is the key question, which is, is Mike Brown a threat to the community when he's unarmed, especially vis-a-vis a trained police officer with a gun? And that's what you're saying. Is he a threat? And was he a threat at that time, such that he deserved to lose his life? And in the black community, we assumed. I mean, I can tell you, I assumed, that he wasn't, based on the fact that the guy wasn't armed. With
Mhm.
someone who's not armed, now I think a police officer at that point has to then start providing a good explanation as to why you took someone's life, because you're only allowed to do that really realistically under certain circumstances. And one is the person has to present that kind of threat, and it's difficult to see how someone without a gun can present that kind of threat. Now in the black community, people like me, we believe that police officers have been shooting unarmed black people for a while, but you'd never caught it on tape. And in this instance, it appeared as if there were witnesses that had actually, now it may not have caught it on tape, but actually saw it, and could prove it. And so
Mhm.
that's where that's where the strength of that movement came from.
Okay, very good, very good. So when you think about where Ferguson is today and where Ferguson was 7 years ago, we do you think they have overcome many of these challenges, and that is they are doing a better job of how they handle crime in the community, a better working conditions between the residents and the police department? We know that we have a new mayor there, the first African American female mayor there. We're going to talk about her a little later, but do you feel that 7 years later that Ferguson has evolved to a stronger, more resilient place to live?
Well, I live down the, they say down the street, but I live several miles from Ferguson.
Everybody say
And,
down the street.
and so, actually, some of the businesses that have come back, there's some construction there. And, in some ways, maybe even looks better than it looked before Mike Brown. But I think before we leave that other question, which was, what does Mike Brown represent? At that time, I think it was one of the first times that first thing
Mm-hmm.
I think St. Louis showed people how to protest.
Mm-hmm.
It really did. And the city of Ferguson's and maybe St. Louis County's police department's reaction to the coverage of it is what caused the coverage to expand. When they arrested those two, uh, um, I think they arrested two reporters out of the McDonald's, and then at that point, people start paying attention. Um, but one of the other things, I mean, and this isn't Mike Brown, but this is, I think, that helped Mike Brown, is when we saw the police officer in South Carolina. I think Mr. Officer Slager shoot Mr. Scott in the back, and that was actually caught on tape. So when you see things like that, it says, well, maybe it actually did happen in the Mike Brown case. I mean, I think it added a lot of credibility to some of the stories that we had heard. Initially, if you remember on the Mike Brown, there were a lot of so-called, and I'm not saying that they're not true. I'm just saying they were people, so-called eyewitnesses, who actually saw him with his hands up.
Mm-hmm.
And then in subsequent investigations, maybe they've changed their story, or the investigators, for one reason or another, based on, at least they say, based on forensic evidence and other facts, that what they say they saw just is inconsistent with the evidence. I mean, I don't know. When I read, because you said we were going to talk about this, I took the opportunity again to review the Department of Justice's investigation of the Mike Brown shooting. And it really came down to that. The witnesses that initially had gotten the community riled up. I mean, really made us, upset.
Period.
Yes,
Yes.
because this was another instance where another unarmed black man was a black boy in this instance was shot. Um, and there were eyewitnesses that said that's what they saw. In subsequent investigations, the investigators said they don't either that they found that their version of what they say they saw was inconsistent with the evidence, or they recanted. I don't know. I read the report. That's what it seems to say. That seems to be why the Department of Justice decided not to pursue criminal charges against the officer.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what happened, though, and the police departments and, the city of Ferguson and also St. Louis County's reaction to it is really what spurred that on. Had they um, in some ways valued the opinion of the African American community, when something like that happened, and conducted a good investigation and not leaked his criminal record, or the
Mhm.
fact that he had a run-in with the cops earlier. They hadn't leaked that, and actually convinced the community that they cared about the truth and cared about, the life of this guy, and the fact that he sat out there, that his remains were out there for as long as they were, those things, even more importantly than did he was he actually murdered, those things indicated to the community that the the police department and those and the local governments weren't objective, and they didn't value our lives. And I mean, and that's the way people felt,
Mhm.
and now changes that have happened. Yes, there are changes that have happened, and we can go into it, a little bit later on. But I mean, there are some clear changes, some positive changes that have happened as a result of Mike Brown's unfortunate killing.
Yeah. That was the part that you discussed regarding Michael Brown laying there on that hot pavement for hours before his body was removed. That sent such a sense
Sent a
of
message.
anger and
Yeah,
violation throughout the country, not just the
yeah.
Ferguson community or the St. Louis community. People were infuriated by that child laying there all of that time. And the underlying message it was, we don't care, or maybe you guys you are not as valued as others. So it was so much that was taking place, so just an eruption of emotions and anger from the way that he was treated, that it just made it difficult to even get to the actual evidence of what had taken place that dreadful day.
I mean, we
Go,
have
go.
confidence at the, if you're going to treat the remains that way, then the community lacks confidence in your ability to get at the truth or to conduct an independent, objective investigation. And in order
Mhm.
to do that, appearance is all, not everything, but appearance is a lot. You need an independent, objective, diverse group of investigators, and I didn't see that. They eventually, in order to in response to the protests, they eventually start putting black officers in charge and things like that. But in the beginning, I don't think it was the those who those in charge of the response, those in charge of the investigation were diverse enough, in my opinion. I mean, because one of the things that you see in the Ferguson Commission is that it was run by Dan Isom. So and that's a reflection of diversity. Someone who was born in the community, African American male, educated and former police chief with the city of St. Louis. When you have people like that conducting, or at least part of the people who are conducting the investigations, then the community has a little more confidence.
Do you think that the reason why many of the people recanted their stories that they were threatened?
You know, and I was when I read the DLJ report, it didn't now it's 165. I think the DOJ report's 165. No, it's like 80, 90 pages. It's a long report, and I haven't read it in a long time and couldn't remember everything that it said, but I did try to see that, and I couldn't get that from the report. But yeah, I mean, that's the problem is that we're all human, and even investigations are conducted by human beings. And so, you don't really know how the question was asked. You don't really know the circumstances under which the question was asked, how many times the question was asked. Was it a leading question, that kind of thing. Was it a convenient time? Those are critical questions in terms of an investigation, and you just can't tell from the DOJ report. And at the end of the day, that's why you want an objective, diverse, in, in a group of investigators, so that we trust the process, because the community at the end of the day has to trust the process, and I don't think we trust the process. And so I think the process has done a lot, at least attempted to do a lot to create the community trust. I'm hoping I'm answering the question.
Yeah, no, you're fine. I looked at the report, and there was a lot of criticism regarding the Department of Justice investigation, and that charges, civil rights violation charges, should have been brought against Darrell Wilson. These are my views regarding charges being brought. You can bring charges. However, the person may or may not be convicted, right? I believe that based upon the lack of confidence in all of the illegal activity portrayed and conducted by the Ferguson Police Department, policing individuals, ticketing them, over ticketing them, ticketing the same people, ticketing cars while parked in their driveways. I believe that that created a prima facie case of wrongdoing, and that community, the police officers, had to share the responsibility of conducting years and years and years of illegal policing upon that community. And so, because of those years and years of illegal policing upon that community of Ferguson, that those charges should have been brought, because you could not give the police department at that point the benefit of the doubt not to bring the charges. You have to go through discovery at this point and find out exactly what level of wrongdoing, if any, had taken place. So I thought the charges should have been brought by the Department of Justice. I think the point that you make, that the way that they asked the questions could have led to the inconsistency of evidence, I think that's an outstanding point. But in all fairness to the community, I think the charges should have been brought against the police officer.
Well, and let me respond to that. So, and I totally understand your point, which is, but the issue that you would face is that what you were talking about, what you're referring to, I think was a systemic problem. Not that the officers weren't complicit, not that they didn't know what's going on, but it was a systemic problem, and therefore you deal with the systemic question. Whether Officer Wilson had, violated Mike Brown's civil rights, though, was more an individual question at that point, in terms of his interaction with Mr. Brown at that point. With Mike Brown at that point. And, if and I don't know, if the stories were recanted and if they were inconsistent or inconsistent with the physical evidence, then maybe that was sufficient for them. I don't know. I do understand. At the end of the day, when you file charges, that is simply opening the door and saying, we're gonna have a hearing in front of an independent, not hearing, we're gonna have a trial in front of independent witnesses, and then they're gonna make their decision. It's not, it's not necessarily saying that, that he's guilty. However, when you file charges, you're saying that there's at least, a preponderance of the evidence that says that this is how it happened. And, when I read the DOJ report, that, their conclusions were on the other side of that there just simply wasn't sufficient evidence. Now, I don't know, and I was more concerned about the systemic issues, and it would have been nice had they filed charges, I suppose, but, I didn't do the investigation. So, I can't tell you intimately, how these people would have responded at trial, because that's, at the end of the day, that's kind of the question. But then again, you lay it out there and you see what happens, and if that's what a trial is for, and simply saying, because we think we're going to lose, we're not going to do it, may not be sufficient.
Right. Very good point. Now, while we are talking about potential charges that could have been brought in this case, let's look at Prosecutor Wesley Bell. Now, his platform for election was that he's going to take a second look at the Mike Brown investigation and bringing charges, state charges.
Was that one of his promises?
Yes.
Oh, I just don't know.
Okay, based on his promises, and that he would, take a look into the shooting and the death of Michael Brown. And he did keep his promise. He did look into it, but no charges were brought under his investigation as well. So do you think when the former President Obama's administration and Department of Justice and Wesley Bell's administration, when both of those return information stating that there is not enough evidence to move forward, there is not enough evidence to bring charges, what does that say to the community, and as it relates to how the community perceived his death, his killing?
Well, I don't think that impacted the our perception or our response, or our need to go forward with systemic changes. Um, the decision not to go forward. I mean, first thing, because of the timing. It was way after. It was long after the actual killing. So, the Wesley Bell did do what he promised. He did conduct an investigation. He did look at it again, and he just made a decision. That it's hard for me as an attorney to disagree with the decision where I was not privy to the information that he was privy. Based on what I saw, based on what I read with the from the Department of Justice, and based on what they said, some of the witnesses said, then I guess I can understand his decision. Whether I agree or disagree, I don't think it's relevant. But I do. If he felt like he did keep his promise, and I don't perceive Wesley Bell as someone who would simply not charge someone when there was sufficient evidence to do it. So, I, all I can say is that's his decision, and the as a member of the community, he was elected, and I got to trust his judgment.
Okay, very good. So, what are the lessons learned from all of this?
Well,
7 years later, the anniversary of Mike Brown's killing. What, in your opinion, if any, what are the lessons learned? I'll go first, okay? I'll go first. Lessons learned, number one for me, that we must stop policing Black communities and communities of color illegally.
Over policing,
over policing, okay, over policing, because we had the same judge, and I will not call his name. We had the same judge sitting in all of these municipalities, Ferguson, all of them, and sentencing people over and over and over again, and not giving these people an opportunity to pay tickets, and people owe thousands of dollars in ticket fines. It was just ridiculous. And so the Department of Justice decision, it dismantled the way those communities were policed. So that's one of the great lessons that came out of this Mike Brown, if there is any good lessons, because we like to life.
I think now, the way I understand it, is that the municipal judges now have to look at a defendant's ability to make payment, and has to consider, I think, community service. That way you're not saddling these poor. I mean, if you're driving, I mean, this is the classic example. I mean, it did a fair amount of traffic. If you're driving around without insurance, or you're driving around, on old license plates, expired license plates, that's generally an indication that you don't have the financial ability to make those payments. And if you don't have that, ability to make the payments, when they catch you, socking you with a $1,500, or saddling you with an additional $1,500 bill, simply is not the answer. And it doesn't create it doesn't create trust from the community. It doesn't answer the question, because these people still have to get to work, school, take their children, to school, with doctor's appointments, or whatever they have to do. People are going to continue to do it. What you have to do is find solutions, that are geared toward resolving what the issue is, not simply adding to the problem. And that's what they were doing. And and a lot of communities were doing it. These were the city was doing it. The inner, what they call the inner, those inner suburb cities were doing it. This was done across the state. I think now judges have to look at the ability to pay, which is, to me, a key constitutional question when you're talking about a fine. Do you have the ability to pay, especially when you're there based on a violation that that is based on your ability to pay. So you're there because you didn't pay your sales tax. Well, that means you didn't pay. Maybe you didn't have the ability, and judges should be looking at, well, why didn't you have the ability to pay? I think Missouri is one of the few states that still allows you to purchase vehicles and then pay your sales tax later. I think there was a law that was proposed in this previous session to force the car dealerships to take that sales tax out, early. That way you don't saddle people with a car and then the inability to pay the $2,000 sales tax within 30 days, because you walked in there and you had, you put down $2,000 or $3,000 for a car, and then within 30 days you have to pay $2,000 for sales tax. That's just difficult to do sometimes, especially for people who are, who are poor.
Very good.
So before I leave that, I want to make sure that I'm clear there. I think that's one of the most significant changes, is that judges have to look at your ability to pay. That is such a key constitutional question for me, and also have to consider community service, because then we're looking at a resolution of why you're here as opposed to just simply punishment.
Okay. So let's look at Ferguson more closely 7 years later. We have our first African-American female judge that's now serving there, and she's doing a great job, Mayor Ella James, and she was elected, and I think she's in her 60s, and she's out there serving the community. Never had a female African-American mayor before in Ferguson. What do you think the onset of all of the incidents that surrounded Mike Brown culminated in a change such as this? Do you think this would have happened without the Mike Brown situation?
No. I mean, definitely, I think people understood the importance of diversity. People understood the importance of inclusion as one of the key elements that people in power have to have when they want the community to have faith in what they're doing. Inclusion and diversity is one of the key elements, in order to have at least the appearance of objectivity. So, yeah, I mean, I think Ferguson even didn't they have an African-American police chief?
Yes, they had. After the Mike Brown killing, they went through several police chiefs. They got rid of the first one, and forgive me, I can't remember his name. And then they, replaced him with an African-American police chief, but they didn't last. Many of them they were just like going through a revolving door during that time. It was such unrest in that city.
I mean, it because of, just like going where they are and who they are, it seems to be a challenging job, but I think the community doesn't distrust it like it used to. The community that it served. I mean, at the end of the day, if it's diverse, and those people who are in those positions say this is challenging, then you trust it more. As opposed when it's more homogeneous. You only have white men in these positions, and they say it's challenging. You just don't trust that as much. I think the community understands when you have diverse people there and they're facing the same challenges, that maybe these challenges are real.
Very good. Now I want to talk to you. Let's shift our discussion somewhat. There's a lot of interesting things that's taking place in the news. Well, they're interesting to me. Actually, some of it is quite fascinating, that so many people in politics have been accused of sexual harassment. So many people in politics. And when you have people in politics that's constantly being accused of sexual harassment, and sexual harassment, just for a basic definition, sexual harassment is unwanted conduct pertaining to sex. So it can be comments, it can be touching, it can be a stare, but it's unwanted. Whatever it is, the conduct that we're talking about is unwanted conduct. So many people have been accused, sitting political leaders have been accused of sexual harassment. Okay, former President Donald Trump accused of sexual harassment. Many people. Joe Biden, our current president, Joe Biden, has been accused of sexual harassment. Women will line up and say they conducted themselves inappropriately, touched them inappropriately, said inappropriate things to them. And many of these individuals, when they get these ongoing accusations, they tend to just ride the storm and stay in office and stay the course of time. But in the case of Governor Cuomo in New York City, he asked the state attorney general to conduct an investigation. And he basically was saying, hey, look, I didn't do this. I did not harass these women. So we would like for you to conduct an investigation and look into this. So he called for his own investigation from somebody that's in his party as well. He's a Democrat, and the state attorney general is a Democrat as well, Attorney General Letitia James. So she was in charge of this investigation. And so for those that do not understand what an attorney general is, an attorney general is one of the chief legal officers of a state. And they primarily represent the views of the position, or they protect the citizens. They are the people's attorney, okay? For lack of a better description. That's an easy description. They represent the people of the state, and they will advocate for those individuals. And they also advise the executive branch of government for that state. So Letitia James, she did this intense investigation. She interviewed at least 11 women, and the decision was that the evidence indicated that Governor Cuomo had sexually harassed these women. Upon this investigation, he ultimately was advised to resign. So what are your thoughts about, let's just talk about this for a moment. Do you think, let me ask the question first. I was basically giving the background on the story. So do you think, because you did a presentation for me a few years back at a conference, and I actually thought your presentation was just top of the line, because you brought out some interesting points as it relates to victims versus accusers. So do you believe that these women were accusers, or are they victims?
Oh, it depends on the context. If you're in a court of law, then they are accusers. If you're in treatment, then they are victims. If you are in at this point, to me, after the Attorney General has conducted what many would consider a thorough and independent, objective investigation, then they're victims. Before that, then they were accusers. But you pointed out correctly that the Attorney General conducted an investigation. That investigation was 106, produced a report that was 165 pages, and it consisted of I think assistant attorney generals and 2 law firms. And when I read it, it looked like they asked all the right questions. And of course, I wasn't there. I didn't hear the answers. But based on the report, it looked like a lot of what he was accused of was substantiated by those witnesses, and also independent people. And when you have an independent report like that, from someone from the same party, an African American female, who was the Attorney General, then I think at that point, because the context here now is political. This isn't a court of law. This is the court of public opinion. And when you have an independent investigation and a report that indicates that you did some of these things, or you did them all, then I think you're pressed with you have to face the fact that people think you did it, and there's substantial evidence that points in that direction. And this isn't a court of law. This is the court of public opinion, and your governor, which is a political appointment. I mean, not a political appointment, a political job based on the election through the people. And if the people no longer have confidence in you, you'll be forced to resign. Many politicians resign before, or even though they've never been technically charged, civilly or criminally, if there's sufficient evidence out there. And it looks like in this instance, there probably is. I mean, I read the report, and, I've conducted reports in the past, and, looked like they did a good job. And, they, well, and let me back up and say this too. I wanted to comment on something that you said, which is you said that he denied doing it. I'm not sure he actually ever denied doing it. He denied his intent. I think he denied that it was as pervasive or there was a pattern. I think he denied that he maybe initiated some of these what many would consider inappropriate conversations, and that
Mhm.
some of these inappropriate conversations were initiated by the accusers or the victims in this case. And so, I don't know that he says these things didn't happen. I think he's saying based on the context, they don't constitute harassment. But
Mhm.
when you get 11 people, saying these kinds of things, and you have an independent, or at least, what looks to be an independent, investigators come to this conclusion after interviewing all these people, then I think, the writing's on the wall, and he needed to, I think he should have resigned so that you don't have to put the people in New York through that. But also, once you get a report like that, unless you're attacking the report and specifically have a good basis to attack the report or the investigators, then I think you're bound. I think you're bound. I think you're bound by the oath that you took for office to maybe resign. One of the things that I think we should be discussing is the fact that politicians, I say back in the day, but politicians back in the day, had to be family men or family women and had to have, a good moral character, and beyond reproach in a lot of ways. And an incident or even an accusation could derail your political aspirations. And, and we had kind of gotten away from that. Now, I'm not saying, that you shouldn't you shouldn't be elected, whatever you're running for, because someone comes out of the woodwork and makes it, an accusation that has no basis. What I'm saying, though, is that being of good moral character should be and should always continue to be one of the qualifications to hold public office. And I mean, it just should be, and as citizens, I think we should be paying attention to that. And I think in this case, and when you look at what happened and what they were alleging him to do, each individual thing by itself, maybe you not get away with it, but maybe you can say there was a misunderstanding. But that's a lot that they said he did, and those things. You can't do those things in the workplace, and you definitely can't do those things if you're in a position of power. I mean, I think the key element almost there is that in this position of power, you can't do these things that he's alleged. I mean, that they said he did. You know, um,
Well, I think that is the problem, that they are people of power. I mean, excuse me. I think that is the problem, that they are people of power. And when you have power, you tend to believe that you are untouchable and you can get away with almost anything. And that opens the door so many times to illicit behavior, conduct, speech, because you feel that you have arrived to a place in life where you're untouchable and you can get away with these things.
yeah. Now, yes and yes, and I agree with you. Now, I have no reason to disagree with you. But I wanted to comment on this. There are things in place. You know, when you get onto a job, it's called onboarding or coming onto a job, and there are classes that you have to take and policies that you have to read, sign off on, and attest that you understand this constitutes sexual harassment, this constitutes assault, this constitutes lying, this constitutes misuse of the internet. These are things that you gotta review, that you gotta know when you're working. Most organizations have these rules in place and have this training, and even the state of New York has those. And what I found amazing about the report is that it wasn't a failing of the system in that these things weren't in place. It was a failing of the people who were supposed to enforce them, and also the people who were supposed to make sure that people understood that these are the rules. When they what struck me about the report is they asked people, do you know where to file a report of sexual harassment? And many people in the governor's, I guess in the government's in the governor's office didn't know. That is a failing of the training. When you bring people on, they have to know where I can make an anonymous report. And then once that anonymous report is made, there should be someone else, an independent, objective person who conducts an independent, objective, fair investigation of that report. If those systems are in place, the training and the requirement that the opportunity to make the allegation anonymously, and then the requirement that it be investigated by independent, objective people, who don't answer to the governor. If you have those things in place, a lot of this may have actually been caught early on. And what I mean by that is, part of the reason that you have training when you come onto a job, what is sexual harassment, what constitutes unwanted, is because, this has changed over time. How we view that has changed over time. You have to re-educate and make sure everybody understands what behavior is expected and will not be tolerated on the job, and that's training. And so what I saw when I read the report, and the report acknowledged this, is there was a failing, not of the procedures, of the people who were supposed to be doing these things. Mm-hmm. So, that's part of what struck me, because then if you don't do these, if you don't conduct the training, if you don't have the independent people, if you don't have the opportunity to make these anonymous allegations or accusations, and if you don't have the follow-up investigations, then the people who are in power are allowed to use their power through intimidation because nothing happens. But if you have these things in place where you can make these anonymous, where you can make these accusations anonymously, and the investigations are conducted automatically, then I think the people in power don't have the ability or lose the ability to intimidate and abuse their power.
Well, that was one of the issues that made the conduct of Governor Cuomo so egregious, in my opinion, that there were so many people that allegedly helped him cover up his conduct, or they were so fearful of losing their jobs and speaking up. So there were many people in his cabinet and within his group that were identified as being complicit in this whole sexual harassment issue, or this sexual harassment conduct that he had over and over and over and over again with these young women that appeared around him, whether they were working in the governor's office or just providing some type of detailed service, like the soldier. He was accused of having to say something to all of these women. Yeah. So what message do you think this sends in 2021 and the 21st century to men of power? What message do you think is being sent today?
Well, people of power, and also people in the human resources department, the people in the general counsel's office or the legal office, the legal section, these things that you have in place in these rules need to be enforced. And if they're enforced, it's less likely that you'll have this incident happen, at least multiple incidents, because had the first person had the ability to hotline, and then that hotline be adequately investigated, then Cuomo would have been put on notice. I can't do that. I can't have that conversation. He wouldn't have the opportunity. His people in his inner circle wouldn't have the opportunity to protect him, because the investigations, a well-conducted investigation, tells you what you shouldn't and shouldn't do. The idea that you had one conversation and then you had another inappropriate conversation, then another inappropriate conversation. There should be investigations where you're forced to admit that I had an inappropriate conversation, and then when the investigation is completed, and they say you had an inappropriate conversation, even if you're not terminated, that's addressed. That person has to have more training. Even if he's the governor, has to have more training and gets and receives a censure. And because he's a politician, if that's leaked, it's less likely that it would happen again, because that would impact his ability to stay in power.
Very good. Very good. Very good. Very good understanding and grasp of what's going on. Thank you so much. You are listening to Legal Views with Attorney Sheila Stewart. We're here on Facebook Live and on CJoy Network. And we have as our guest today, Attorney Kenneth Goins. He has done a tremendous job just helping us to unravel so many of the issues that's taking place today. We have shared with you our views on the Mike Brown anniversary and the state of Ferguson today. And we're coming through now talking about Governor Cuomo's resignation. So as we wrap this subject matter up, do you think that he did the right thing to resign from his office as governor? Was that the right decision? Or should he have stood fast to fight?
Well, I want to make sure that I echo what you said in the beginning, which is these are my personal opinions.
Absolutely,
and, these are just my personal opinions. These anybody that I work for, or that I represent. And in my personal opinion, yes, I think it was a good thing that he resigned, especially based on the allegations and the substantiated allegations that appear in that report. I think he should have resigned without a doubt. Yeah, I mean, he wasn't going, because, and this is not, I'm understanding the context. This is not a court of law. This is the court of public opinion, and whether you should continue to hold the office where you have made certain promises to the people of New York. And I think, some may view his actions as having violated some of those promises.
Okay. And he has he has young daughters as well. And he made a statement that the pain that his daughters were going through, the humiliation, I definitely think he did the right thing. He did it for his family, and most definitely in honor of those victims, to just let that go and apologize. Let's talk about his apology, where he actually stated that times have changed, the cultural lines have been moved, and generational lines have been moved, and what was acceptable several years ago, or I don't know how many years ago, it's no longer acceptable. That made absolutely no sense to me. When has it ever been acceptable to sexually harass somebody or to say sexually inappropriate comments to them on the job? You are not at work to make sexual comments. You are at work to do a job. As an employment attorney, you are not at work to make sexual explicit comments. You are at work to do a job. And so when people tend to think that's okay, you have a bigger problem on the hand. So what do you think about his apology?
I didn't actually hear his apology, and I didn't know he said that now. And what he said, I think you said two things. The first one is, does he recognize that what he did was wrong, and is he apologizing for it? That's what I think you seem to be saying he didn't do.
Okay.
Instead he couched it in terms of, times have changed, and I just didn't know. But here's the issue with that, and I've said that before, which is his training. Even though you're governor, when you come on, he should be required to take the sexual harassment training like everybody else. It doesn't last forever. I mean, I'm not saying, he should be spending days at it, but, everyone has to sit down there and read the sexual harassment policy and take the training. It's usually, it's usually a few minutes, and he should do that. Then that way, he can't then turn around and say, I didn't know that the culture has changed and that we can't do that anymore. And that's why I said maybe there was a failing in those who were responsible for making sure that even the governor takes the adequate training before he takes office. And as a governmental official, everybody should undergo the same onboarding process. What's sexual harassment? What's racial discrimination? What is what is violence on the job? What is inappropriate internet use? Everybody from the CEO all the way down to whoever you consider is down at the bottom. Everyone used to take the same class. If
Mhm.
he takes the same class, then he can't then turn around and say, I didn't understand what was expected of me, which is really what that excuse is. I didn't understand with the behavior that was expected or required of me based on rules that I think the way I understand it is that there were even some changes uh, to the to the sexual harassment laws done through executive order. It's difficult to make the argument that he didn't understand what was expected of him. But even if he didn't, his training should have kicked in. And I would be interested. I would be interested to know if he actually did the sexual harassment training. If he actually, read the policy and signed off on it, like every other employee has to.
Okay. He probably did not. I'm sure
I
he did, unfortunately.
which means it's a failing of the system that's in place. I mean,
Mhm.
it's failing too. I'm not absolving him of responsibility, but I'm saying the idea those classes are there because people, a lot of people, there is disagreement even amongst lawyers as to what constitutes sexual harassment, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable behavior. And those classes are designed to put you in a position where you don't get close to that line.
Mhm.
And that's what those classes are designed to do. That's what the policy is designed to do. And if you're simply glossing over it, especially for those who are in power, if you're simply glossing over it, to me, you're not taking advantage of the opportunity to learn something. Then you know not to do it. I mean, the way I understand it, he was touching and having conversations that, oh my goodness, it's just scary as a person who's in charge to talk about these things with people over whom you have power. That was, you can't do that, and you should know that in today's world. He seemed, I've seen him on CNN, and he does definitely seem to be an intelligent man. So I wonder how he didn't know it. And so, I go back to, there was definitely a failing of the system there,
Mhm.
you know, in part
Well,
because he had so much power, maybe, I don't know.
failing of the system and a failure of the former governor. So I put
Yeah,
the primary responsibility on the governor for his conduct and behavior, alleged conduct and behavior, and then the system needs to be improved.
yeah.
So you have done a great job. I have enjoyed having you. We're going to wrap this program up. And before we wrap it up, tell us how people can join the Mound City Bar and the benefit of getting involved with the Mound City Bar.
So now I had put my hat on as the Mound City Bar president. So what the Mound City Bar is,
Congratulations on being the Mound City Bar president.
oh, thank you, thank you. Well, first thing I wanted to let everyone know that Mound City Bar is celebrating its 100-year anniversary in February of next year, 2022. Um, the Mound City Bar is a affinity bar. It's a Black Bar Association. It was created in 1922, really in response to the fact that Black lawyers here couldn't join the white association. So, under our Constitution bylaws, we do like four things. We support Black attorneys. We support Black law students. We support the community, and also we support and enhance the legal community. And I think we do a lot of good things. And let me just real quickly say that some of the things that we do. First, we offer scholarships. We offer the free legal discussions and clinics.
Mhm.
We try to advise people, politicians, community leaders, when they're thinking about policy changes. You can always call us up, and we have members, who have expertise in various areas. Also, if you're looking for a lawyer, you can contact us in the community. And we're improving the website, to make sure that we capture all of the talent, of our membership, and try to so we can connect members of the community with lawyers with those expertise that those people in the community need. So I think we do good work in that way. I think, well, we have a communication with our representatives in Jefferson City and also in Congress. So when laws are being written and you're talking about the impact or the implication of these laws, we have people with expertise who can come testify in support or in opposition, or even testify and give suggestions about maybe changes in some of the proposed legislation. Yeah, and how can you get involved? If you're an attorney, you simply go to moundcitybar.com, or if you're a paralegal, you go to moundcitybar.com, hit membership, and pay the money, and then you're a member. And that at that point, we produce a newsletter twice a month, and that newsletter has a lot of information. We celebrate our own. We talk about available jobs. We talk about things going on in the community. I think it's a good place to get to know people, and also grow your career. As we offer free continuing legal educations courses to our members, enough so that you meet your annual requirement. So I think the Mount City Bar Association does a lot. We do a lot in the community. We seek to and also collaborate with other community organizations. So that's what we do. That's who we are. We're excited about our 100-year anniversary. Come and celebrate it with us. One of the things that just took place recently is that one of our members spearheaded what we call the Freedom Suits Memorial. From 1800 to about 1860, slaves used to come to Missouri to sue for their freedom, and about 300 did. And this memorial will celebrate their suits along with their white lawyers, and many of them won. So this is a memorial that is being constructed right in front of the courthouse. It will forever remind us about where we came, and that's one of the things that the Mound City Bar. It's a membership. We spearheaded, not spearheaded, but one of our members spearheaded it, and we were one of the first organizations, to donate, and buy the brick papers, that were needed to support the creation of this monument. I think that is a good place of history. I think kids in grade school and high school are going to visit this thing. These are the kinds of things that Mound City Bar does, and I think we deserve your support.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to be with me on today. You've done a tremendous job. You always have so much information. You're a studious individual. And thank you, Daryl Breath and Minister Donnie Savage, for this opportunity. And you are now in the hands of Minister Donnie Savage as we end Legal Views with Attorney Sheila R. Stewart and our special guest, Attorney Ken Goins. Thank you. Thank you for listening to us on this evening, and we will see you next week here on Legal Views with Attorney Sheila Stewart. Thank you so much. And you are now in the hands of Minister Donnie Savage. Don't go anywhere, Attorney Goins.
Oh.